Hey guys, it's Ted Bogert. We're back with the Ted Show. I am super excited to have Adam Lowery on the show. If you guys did, I know you did because you asked me questions. If you guys did any research or a little bit, anything, look at his social media, his website, all the good things that Adam's on, you know that he's got a fantastic background, a great story, a great journey, and he's got Cognitive Rampage, which we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Now, Ted, thanks for having me, man. You're too kind, brother. You are too
Uh,
kind.
Look, man, I'm just reading what I read. I'm repeating what I read. So, for those people who don't know Adam, will you give them a little background on you?
Yeah, sure. And but before I preface the background, I do believe that all of us have a unique story and a background of where we come from. I think all of our lives are a story yet to be put in a book, and some are in a book. I encourage so many people to live the narrative that they imagine in their mind, and this can happen. I think we are given the backgrounds that we are to become the great people that we are meant to be.
Amen to that. I agree 100%.
Yeah, so I'll briefly walk into some background stuff. Long story short, man, I was an athlete for my whole life into college football. I played that for a while. There was nothing else in life. It was football or die, right? That's what life was. And I got injured in college, and it ended my career. I didn't know what to do, and let's just say my childhood had some good times and some bad times. It was a rough childhood for various reasons, but it's what made me, right. So I don't want to harp on that too long. It's what made me got through that. I didn't know what I was going to do after college football, so I did the only thing I knew to do, which was turn to selling drugs. Right. I just let that be out there, right?
I got you.
That's what I did, and I lived a crazy life for a long time. I'll skip forward through all the craziness that life brought me. I moved into the bar and nightclub business. Somehow they seem to go hand in hand in life. I don't
Can't imagine why.
I moved into that business, man, and I did that for nearly a decade. And it was a Tuesday night at a club that I was a partner in downtown Orlando, and someone at like 1:30 at peak time in the club or whatever, they turned the lights on. And I just looked what was happening with the lights on. And it's an odd thing if you're looking at a club that's packed and it's a dance club, then the lights come on, right? You're like, what am I doing, man? Like, what is this for a minute? I had some odd thing that happened. Long story short, I went home that night. I had a 16-hour argument with myself in the living room about what life is, who I was, what I was supposed to do, all the things we all ask ourselves, right? And within 3 or 4 days, I got rid of everything. The girlfriend I had for 4 years, quotes friends, my stuff, I got rid of it all. And I went on this thing called walkabout, if you will. My brother hooked me up with this labor job down in the Keys to go do some laboring. And I went down there, spent some time in the Keys, spent some time in Tennessee. It was about a year and a half, 2 years. Went out to Acoma Pueblo, out in Sky City, New Mexico with I'm part Native American, lived out there for a while and just kind of traveled, man, not just asking questions, man, just like, well, who am I, right? What do I do, right? And
Right.
I came back from that, and there was no part of me that was like, all right, I want to help other people, right? That's the cliche stuff you hear, right? I came home and I just want to help others, right? And no,
It didn't happen that way.
no, I wanted to help myself by helping people. Maybe, I don't know. I started coaching kids at the YMCA. A friend of mine invited me to give my first talk ever at my old middle school to the athletes. And I was like, dude, I studied on what I was going to talk about like it was the SAT, man. Like, these are like 7th graders, you know what I mean? And I got like 10 minutes, and I studied for hours to give this talk. I gave that talk, and something just kind of led me to become a mental health counselor. So I went back to school for that, and I was never the grades kid, right? I was the athlete guy that just made B's to get by, and get into college. I wasn't that guy, but by golly, I swear to God, I went and got my master's in mental health. I made 1 B, the rest A's, right? I'm proud of that.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, it was fun, and I got through it, man. And I ended up treating people with addiction for a couple of years down in South Florida. I was into it, but the world of treatment wasn't what I hoped. I had walked into this world like we're here to help everybody, right? And do the
Right.
scientific approaches and offer what we can. No, 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 no. It's ran by based insurance companies, the non-scientific. I want to get into it, right? If
It's
people are
true.
interested on how I really feel, just tune in the podcast on iTunes. We're almost 270 episodes in.
You're killing it on the podcast. It's amazing.
Dude,
Really.
I go off, man, and so something had to be done, right? So I started speaking out against it. I wound up on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast when I was out in LA. That was a wild blessing and a wild night how I met Joe, and he put me on the podcast. And I kid you not, Ted, not a few hours after I got off the Joe Rogan podcast, I was fired from both of my therapy jobs.
Why?
Both. I outed the system, man. Like I just
Oh
I
gosh.
put
How
it
did
out.
they fire you? What was their technical term? Did you have a what is it, a morals clause?
No, one of them called me and said, "Well, we had some issues with the application and the processing." I'm like, "I've been working here for 2 months, man. Like, come on, man." And they let me go. And honestly, after they did, that was the best thing that could have happened because I was like, "Okay, this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna turn this up a notch." And then then the cognitive rampage was born from there. It was
So I
born.
have questions before we get to cognitive rampage for you.
Sure. Go ahead.
You talk about, I read enough to know we have a very similar childhood experience from what I have read on you and what you alluded to. Were you in a healthy place when you became a mental health counselor? Had you dealt with all of your demons up to that point, all of your past? Had you gone through and kind of it was cathartic for you and got rid of it? Or were you still at a point where you're like, all right, I'm dealing with other people's problems. But I still haven't figured mine out yet.
Well, I don't think we ever figure out all of our problems. I think that
It's so true.
I think that stays with us, right? To the point that we allow it to affect us, right? When I started taking responsibility for my own responses to what I had experienced, things began to change. When I stopped blaming, my father or what was happening. When I backed away from that, and said, "Look, this was on me." That's why I dove into psychology because one, I want to know why he was the way he was.
Right.
And two, why I was. And then I started learning, wow, wait a minute, we control our emotions. What are you talking about? We have thoughts that create emotions. From those emotions, we create behavior. For everything, all the fingers started pointing at me. It was like, it's on you now.
People don't like that, Adam. You know they don't like that.
No. And the more I got into it, the more I was like, wow, this is on me to choose. The perception that we shape of our life, of our history, of our story, it creates the narrative we tell about our life that we tell ourselves. And this continued narrative about abusive home and violence, and if you continue that narrative, man, it shapes the life that you are then living, right? Rather than using it. It's why two people that can come from the same terrible place would say, "Hey, I'm this successful because I'm from an abusive life, or I'm in prison because I came from an abusive life," right?
Yep.
And so, no, for me, it wasn't. It was recategorizing what I had been through, and then making them reasons that I was doing better as opposed to excuses to why I couldn't.
Correct. So smart. I love that. I think it's important. I did 5 years counseling, and I think recategorizing I hadn't heard that term before, but I like it. And I think that once you realize it's on you, that was on them, but how you're moving forward is on you and how you react and respond. And I love that you said take responsibility for your responses. Radical responsibility, is that what one of those new terms is? I did a show on it. But I think it's so important for you to recategorize. That's great. So I have another question. Since I have a master's in healthcare, and I did a lot of nonprofits, including licensing the mental health facilities, local ones. What was it that was going on? Can you speak in generalities if you want, or be specific? What was going on that was aggravating you so much? Was it just because it was so systematic and so insurance billing, or was it that the people had become, which I had found, a lot of them had become lackadaisical and laissez-faire in their approach because they realized they were going to get paid no matter whether the service was provided or not?
Yeah, it's probably fivefold for me. I feel for the practitioners on the front line because they were not allowed to practice of what their style was.
Right. Yeah.
Like my style was in your face. Not everyone loved me, but I was in your face. And for me, rather than counsel you, I wanted to teach you psychology. I wanted to, here's the tools they taught me in my degrees. You can learn this and apply it yourself.
Right.
And so those in the middle, those on the front lines, they're held. They were held by groups they were allowed to run, things they were allowed to say. They were put in this box. You have to practice in this box. Forget what your style is. The groups have to be on this. And one of the bigger issues I had was the fact that, and let me preface by saying I'm a fan of whatever works for you. If somersaults work for you to make your life better, then my God, do some somersaults. I'm in. I don't care. But what I didn't like is 90 to 98% of the approach in rehabs from around this country was a non-scientific based treatment called AA. And AA has helped thousands of people, millions of people. I'm a fan if it works for you. But when it's 90% of the approach and there's no scientific basis backing that I had problems with. And I'm going, there wasn't even an AA class in my degree.
Wow.
Yet we didn't take a class on here's AA and NA. We didn't cover that. And this was the main approach. And the other approach I didn't like was trading drugs for drugs. You're coming in to get off street drugs, but here, take our drugs. And then some of those psychiatrists that do the diagnosing, they were caught up in a bad place because they know insurance companies were going to kick the patient out the minute they didn't belong there. The minute insurance qualified them for no longer inpatient, they were out. So a psychiatrist is dropping on 5, 6 diagnoses to these people, trying to keep them in there, right? They're trying to do them good, but then then the patient, the client, I like saying the person, then the person believes these multiple diagnoses that they are that, and then they allow the symptomatic diagnosis to thus define who they are, right? They become defined by their symptoms. I am an addict, right? That drove me nuts, right? You're being affected by depression. You're not an addict, right? You're not your symptoms. Ted,
I love that thought process. Yeah, you're not your symptoms. That's good.
Say I am headache. Right?
No, we don't.
I have a headache. I'm being affected by a headache. We don't want to say I am a headache, right? But yet I am depressed, right? I am anxious. I am bipolar. I am an addict, right? And then the loose ends of the diagnosis were driving me nuts. People did meet the criteria for these diagnoses, but yet they got to give them the pills that meet the diagnosis, right? And oh my God. And
so they have to up the diagnosis. Yeah, it's a vicious, horrible cycle that the majority of people who practice are amazing, but their hands, when I tell you their hands are tied, I'm preaching to the choir with you. Their hands are so tied that they're not actually able to provide a lot of times the real service that people need, and they're edging things into the diagnosis that are only there so that it meets the whatever number on the insurance code. It's very frustrating. So you get to a point where you're like, I've had enough. And is this where Cognitive Rampage was born?
Yep, that's where it was born. It was born when I had enough. I've been fired, and I'm like, okay, that's it. We're gonna out everybody. I'm telling you, this treatment, this is over. It's done. You're not gonna get away with it. I quit. Once I quit my other job, I was quit. Then they rehired me because I was a decent therapist, and they brought me back. And then they fired me after I was gone. But the guy told me to discharge my patient to a tree. Yeah,
to a tree.
It's a homeless shelter pickup in Miami, and discharge him to a tree, and because his insurance days were out. Wow. And I'm going, he's not ready. We can't do that. That was my first fall. And these are the things that were happening, and true too. The treatment itself, right? People just go, oh, they're going to rehab for 30 days, 60 days, they'll be okay. I'm not a big fan of this because there's a thing that I believe called over-treatment. That if I'm a hammer, right, I'm a therapist and a psychiatrist. If I'm that, I'm looking for the nail. I will accidentally create things in your life that created, quotes, trauma, right? So I can build up traumas in your life accidentally. I'm just trying to help. But if I'm a hammer and I'm a psychiatrist and you need a diagnosis, or I'm a therapist and I have to write notes that match the diagnosis that you've been given, I will bring stuff up that wasn't even a thing for you. I will make them things that we call them unconscious ideals or unconscious trauma, right? And we bring this to the forefront, and then people stay in treatment for years and years and years. And I believe there's a thing called overtreatment, where now you are just zoned in, where you're now just an addict or you're just somebody in therapy, period. Therapy is not always the answer.
Right.
And that's where I get crap from the other side too, because you can over therapize people, right? You can go too far, and where it's like, hey man, just back out of the terms for a minute, back out of the diagnosis for a minute. Sometimes I don't even think we should have been telling our people their diagnosis, because then you have you have self-fulfilling prophecies, right? I am the diagnosis.
I've seen it. I know. I've absolutely seen it. I think if you put that idea in, sometimes it brings the sense of relief because then there's a label for it. There's something they can Google and it says, all right, this is you. And there's some sense of relief for people. However, the self-fulfilling prophecy I've seen happen a lot. If you tell someone they are XYZ, chances are they're going to live up to exactly what you told them in some way, shape, or form. And I know other people get aggravated about it, but you've made a movement, an initiative out of it called Cognitive Rampage.
Yeah. So for me, treatment or change. Let's talk about change, right? Instead of treatment. Change for me, it comes fivefold, right? Typically, what's wrong with us at the time is our neurology is misfunctioning, right? Our neurology is wrong, and this is linked to our biology, right? So I don't believe addiction is a disease, and we won't do that on this show, but I just don't believe it's a disease. It can become a neurological pathway of a response pattern and behavior, right? So when we take the 5 things that create the change, our current neurology is shaping us to do behaviors and have thoughts that we have, right? So if we want to change the present day neurology or the biology, it takes biology. We have to focus on our biology and change that, a more healthier biology. We have to look at our environments. What environments, people, places, things, where are we at? What are we around? What are we doing? What's the influence to our story? And then third, our cognition or our cognitive, what we believe. That's really, to think is what cognitive means, to think. What do we think and what do we believe? Those are 3 levels. What we believe, what we think, and what we feel are 3 separate levels, and it starts with what you believe. People nowadays, we just go, I just feel. I just feel. And I'm going, well, stop. Well, what are you thinking? Whatever you're thinking is creating the feeling, but whatever you believe is shaping how you think, right? And so that third part is the cognition, how and what we think, how we talk about our lives, our narratives, our stories, right? The fourth would be behavior, a repeated behavior pattern. Whatever we're doing in a behavior pattern shapes the other 3. All 4 of those create our present day neurology, our functioning of our mind. So if we want to change our present day mind, it seemed logical to me to how did our mind function how it does today? What we think, the environments we're in, the behaviors we do, the biology of our body itself, right? And the behaviors we repeat. Well, that's how we got here. So if I want to change how my mind or my brain is functioning, or quotes, a brain disease, if I want to change that, well, then I have to change my environments. I have to change what I think, where I'm at, what I believe, what I'm doing, the environments that I'm around, and I need to freshen up my biology, sleep being one of those. Sleep is so underrated. So if I do those 4 things, then I can create a different, over time, brain functioning. And our brain has so much plasticity. People think your brain is what your brain is today, and that's not true. It changes like this. It's changing right now. Ted, my brain is different by the end of this show.
I have no doubt.
So we have this phrase we all like to say. I hate this phrase, Ted. That's just who I am.
Oh yeah, that and it is what it is, or status quo. I don't like any of them.
It's the cop out, right? They're saying that's just who I am. That's it. Take it or leave it. You don't want to change. But what was not happening in these facilities are those 4 points of change. You were not working on that. And for the most part, rehab, that is not the environment. I mean, you take out all the stresses of the day. You might get somebody 60 days in, ready to go. They're ready to go home. You get them home, and then stress, jobs, relationship, marriage, kids. It all shows back up in a different.
Well, also, if you've got a drug or alcohol addiction, you go back to the same environment, especially on the drug side. It's the same neighborhood, the same house, the same people you were buying drugs from, the same opportunity, and you can't necessarily address that in rehab, inside, because once they leave and they go out, they're right back in it, and the temptation is there. That's why the recidivism rate is so incredibly high for these rehab programs.
Yeah, and the addiction part, what scares me the most, what a lot of people don't know, are the ODs that come from addiction are mostly about 70% are due because they're crossing over drugs, not because of one drug itself. Is when you come out of rehab and you're on the drugs they gave you, be that Suboxone or something else like that, right? And then you go back to the other drug, right? We'll just stick with the heroin thing. And now you're maxing drugs. When you cross over the drugs, that's when you get crazy. That's the sad part.
Right.
The deaths happen from using multiple drugs or the crossover. You've been in rehab for 60 days. Now you do the same amount that you were doing when you went into rehab. Plus you used to be on Suboxone, or now you're on something else. You cross over. That's where these deaths are happening. And, for me, I'll just run into it, right? A lot of people, that's where the book came from, Ted, is because I got tired of just complaining.
Yeah.
I got tired of just pointing out the problem. And I said, okay, let's what's the solution then, Smarty Pants, Adam?
So what is the solution? Because right now I feel like people want to try something different. But like the system is broken, but that's where the money comes from, and that's where the insurance comes from, and that's where the thought process comes from, and that's where programs like Scared Straight and all of that came from. And so there definitely needs to be a shift. So what is, from your perspective, what do you think some of the answers or solutions are?
So I'll start on a micro level, right? So for me, I wanted to write a book that was an answer to people. Now, I wish I could say I was a smart guy that came up with this whole thing, but it's not. In psychology, mental health, and treatment, even in medical, we build on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the shoulders of giants, right, that come before us. So for me, to come up with the original idea, I tried, but I ended up putting together a bunch of different theorists from all over, from behavioralists, cognitive practitioners, environmental practitioners, all these practitioners, down to some philosophers from back in the day, and tried to put together a self-application that encompassed those 5 phases of change that I talked about that you could apply to yourself. And I ended up coining a new theory in treatment called trans-rational structure behavior theory. But you can't sell a book titled that at all. So the cognitive rampage became,
you cannot.
Right, a thinking rampage is what it really means, right? A thinking rampage, and to really quote what it really means, right, is the idea is cultivating happiness through a passionate pursuit of life optimization, an enthusiastically persistent search for competence in mind, body, and belief, while building an optimistically rational life philosophy and living and growing a purposeful structure. That is the definition of living your cognitive rampage.
I love that definition. Some people commented, and I thought it was interesting. They're like, Rampage, Ted, because Rampage has such a almost like an angry, out of control kind of connotation to it. However, you're talking about being so in touch with that you get outside of yourself and you think differently, like you're talking about. Real quick, Spence says, Adams, do you know Spence? Spence with Central Care Mission. He says he's knocking it out of the park. Central Care Mission is a neuroscientific approach coupled with cognitive behavioral benchmarks. So
that, to me, has always been the future. The future of treatment and mental health is a neuro-based treatment mixed with some cognitive behavioral aspects. That is the future of treatment in my mind. That has always been the future. The answers lie in the brain and the functioning of the brain, how we maybe can manipulate that. How do we do that, right? But it's our behaviors that shape all that. I 100% agree. The rampage part, Ted, to go back, the thinking rampage is they're contradictory, right? Because if I'm in a rampage, I'm out of control, I'm losing it. But if I have a thinking rampage, I'm purposefully meaning to question my own BS.
Yeah.
All of the things that I believe about my life, everything, I call them the core beliefs in my book, right? So the basis of all that you think and how you think come from 3 core beliefs. What you believe about self, others, and the world. Right. These are the 3 beliefs. So whether you like the Miami Dolphins or you like eggplant, all stem from these 3 beliefs. Right. So if one of those beliefs is negative or pessimistic in a way, then how might I think or what I might think about other things. Right. And so most of us don't know what we believe about the world.
Agreed. Oh, my God. We have no idea. None.
We don't. And so the rampage part is question yourself in a thinking rampage till you drive yourself insane. Why do I believe that? Why do I think that that's my life? Why do I believe that about myself, others in the world? Well, why do that? Why do that? Why do that? Well, this answer, why do that? right? And at first, I ask people, can you tap into the idea? When I ask people, is there truth in the world, right? It's a trick question. It's a setup. People are like, well, yeah, there is, there isn't, I don't know. And so I use the roller coaster example, right? If you ride a roller coaster, Ted, and you tell me it's not scary, I ride it, says the scariest ride of my life. Who's telling the truth?
Right.
So the truth,
Completely different.
it's the perception, right? So when we
Yep.
can grab a hold of the truths that we believe with all of our hearts, we believe it must be that, right? As Albert Ellis says, masturbation. It must be that. I must be this person. When we grab on to our experiences and define them as truth in our lives, even though we know truth is a mere perception, right? The one that made it out of this place because he was abused, the one that didn't because he was abused, right? When we realize that we grasp that in our own mind, that change is merely willing to question our own beliefs and thoughts, how we think, what we think, and that we can change that at the moment we decide. And anyone can think about their lives when they had a decision they had to make that was tough. I always say depression and anxiety, it lives in a place called toil. Once you make the decision, you're out of the toil and dealing with the fallout of the decisions, you move forward. But most of us are not willing to turn the question on ourselves and go, why do I believe that I must be this way, that it must be my dad's fault, it must be my family, the environment, my boss, my wife, my husband, my kid, it must be the disease's fault, it must be all of these things. But when we can do that, we can begin to shape a new narrative. Now, that's not the end all be all, because remember, there's 5 phases. That's just the cognitive part. Right. That's just the what we believe and think. Now, you can change what you think all you want to, but if you don't change your environments, your behaviors, work on your biology to change your neurology, good luck with that.
Right. It's funny because I think people take it's no matter what you're doing to improve your life and to get to the bottom of things, people want to take a little snippet. So they're going to find one of those 5 that makes the sense to them, and they'll go, all right, I tried this, it didn't work. But you didn't do the other 4, or you didn't address the other 4. Or in reality, nobody wants to be challenged on why they think the way they think. I'm sure you've done this because I can tell you're that type of person too. Sometimes I'll just ask people, why do you think that way? That will start an argument so fast, and I don't do it to be that. It's just I'm amazed sometimes what comes out of people's mouths, and I want to know the why. Like, why do you think that? Why would you ever think that? Let alone say it. But why is that part of who you are? People don't like it, but I swear if they just did a little bit of intrinsic work, a little internal work, it would get them so far. And that's what you're talking about. Really address you. You have to figure out you.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I talk about principles of change. You roughed over a couple of them. H equals C is one of my principles. Humility equals competence. The B to B principle, that belief equals thoughts. Thoughts create feelings. Feelings predict behavior. So B to B principle is one of those. And the core belief principles on top of that. So there's some beliefs that I use in there to help you try to examine that. And we have to be humble enough to question ourselves to gain self-competence. The other one is the CCE principle, that competence to confidence equals enthusiasm. It's not happiness you're after, it's enthusiasm. So if we can be enthusiastic about our own lives and questioning that, if we can get competent about ourselves, we can be self-confident in ourselves. That can lead to an enthusiastic self. But in order to get self-competent, you got to be able to go, why do I, every time I go, why do I think that so much? I tell people, start anything in life. I don't care if it's politics or jobs or whatever you're doing, wherever your hard no's or yeses are, start there and question those and work backwards.
Love it. All right. Where do people, I put adamlowery.com. Is that the best way for people to reach you, or to purchase Cognitive Rampage, or to figure out more about Adam Lowery and Cognitive Rampage?
Yeah, the podcast is on iTunes, Stitcher if you have Android. It's on YouTube as well, Cognitive Rampage, Podbean, a whole bunch of places. We've been doing it for about 5 years. There's some cerebral guests that I've had on there that have made me sit back in my chair and go, wow, I'm an idiot. Sit down.
I feel like that every day, my friend.
I doubt it, Ted.
I do.
Like Dr.
I'm amazed at the stuff that people like you, like that is something that I thought but never expanded on it, and then you took it and added so much depth to it. Now, if we could get more people to listen, it would be good. So I've got some ideas on that. All right, Adam Lowery, Cognitive Rampage, thank you so much for being on the show. That was really, really awesome.
Ted, thank you very much, man. Honored to be here, buddy.
Honored, my friend. All right, we'll see you guys soon.